The podcast you're about to listen to may contain random lines from musical theater, terrible attempts at regional accents, and a sincere discussion about mental health. You have been warned. Are you ready to start singing with your feet? Formidable. Allez, c'est parti. Non, nous ne sommes pas fous, nous ne sommes pas ivres, nous sommes juste dans la joie. Une joie profonde, nos cœurs elle inonde. Cette joie, elle vient du ciel, non, nous ne sommes pas fous.
Welcome to Sing With Your Feet, the podcast in which we leave no stone unturned in our search for joy. For joy in that amazingly rich archaeological dig site which is our lives. The podcast in which we learn to make a big freaking deal about everything. The podcast in which your successes, little and big, become something to celebrate in a way which is uniquely meaningful to you. My name is Lily Fields, and I'm going to be your fairy godmother for the next half hour or so. My job is to bring fairy dust to your life. Fairy dust whose only purpose is to help you gain new perspective on the circumstances of your life. I am here to help you see that your ideal life, the life you were destined for, is within your reach. Yes, you're going to have to work for it. Yes, there might be some tears and some backsliding along the way. But the motto of the International Union of Fairy Godmothers is, hard work always pays off. If you can accept that, if you can accept that there is a plan for your life, that it is a plan for joy and for peace and for love and even a few magical moments sprinkled in here and there, and that you can actually help make those moments happen by doing the hard work of examining your own heart and making the small, sometimes seemingly insignificant tweaks to the way you think about and talk to yourself, then you are just a hop, skip, and a jump from making progress. And remember, our goal, first and foremost, is to make progress. We threw that other P word, the word, oh dare I even whisper it, perfection. We eliminated that word from our vocabulary a couple episodes ago. So all we really need are tiny, little, insignificant tweaks. Because even the tiniest little improvement is progress. And I love progress. And as you will see as the episode progresses, I love to celebrate progress of any, absolutely any kind. As we start taking those things seriously, murky areas of our lives, areas in which we often feel overwhelmed or about which we're ambivalent or tepid even, or areas that used to just seem gray to us, those areas become much more clearly defined, while perhaps not yet to the point of being black and white. Once we know what our values and our virtues are, it makes decision-making so much easier. I thrive in just about every single area of my life on simplifying my choices. You see, the more you know about what you like and what you want, the less likely we are to make snap bad decisions or to give in to temptation when it inevitably comes for a visit. When what I want is clear and obvious to me, then it becomes easier to reject that which does not fit into my vision. Simplifying decisions is an all-important life hack which greatly reduces stress, although that's a topic for another episode entirely. Just put a pin in that thought. I just want you to know where we're going so that when I get lost on a bit of a tangent about Boobie retirement parties and menopause happy hours, you won't think I've completely lost my mind. Oh, well, you might think it anyway, and I'm cool with that. Speaking of which, this is your weekly reminder that what we're doing here can dislodge a lot of feelings. You might just need professional help, a therapist, a counselor, someone competent to work with you one-on-one to unpack some of those dislodged feelings, help you understand where they're coming from, and help you uncover your harmful thought patterns or your behaviors. I really, really mean this. If you need help, get help. Are you nodding? You're nodding, aren't you? Yes, Lily, I hear you. I will get help. Good girl. Let's admit it, over the last 8 episodes, you have had quite a bit of homework. I just want us to take a second to review what I've been asking you to do, those broad categories of exercises, so that you can see how they all fit together to help us define your ideal life. First up, we've spent some time defining and dreaming about your ideal life. This exercise was inspired by Marie Kondo and her book, The Life-Changing Magic of Tidying Up. I dedicated all of episode 4, entitled MacGyvering KonMari, to this life-alteringly simple thought experiment. However, I don't just stop at the idea of what my ideal life looks like. I want us to imagine what kind of person we are in our ideal life. To do this, I gave you a prompt. It goes like this. In my ideal life, I am a person who... ... There was a specific context I asked you to observe for this exercise. I told you to set your alarm for 15 minutes before anyone else in your home woke up. I told you to, the night before, set up the space where you would be sitting to work on this exercise. Set it up as if you were expecting an honored guest. And I wanted you to do this every morning for as long as it took for that well to run dry. Now, Lilyfields. Oh, that's you. You sound like a Southern belle, and there ain't no evidence to the contrary. I've been doing this for weeks now. What do I do with these statements? Oh, why, I am just so very glad you asked. What a studious country bumpkin you are. What you do next is that you read those statements back to yourself. You notice where there's overlap in the statements. You underline the words that repeat. I worked with a woman who did this exercise, and of her more than 50 statements, 20 of them were about simplicity. The word simple, simplify, simplicity. Simplicity in a relationship, simplicity in her work, simplicity in her meal choices. What was fascinating about this recurring word, simplicity, in her exercise was how very clearly it was tied to another piece of her homework. I'll come back to that in a second. When you go through and reread your statements, you'll find no surprises. You'll just have a deeper understanding of how very, very consistent you are. Embrace that. That is the very core of who you are. Our second homework assignment was to examine what used to make us sparkle. The treasures from our childhood, from a more innocent time when we didn't have the pressure of family and relationships and work and life to squeeze all of the joy out of us. The homework looked like this. You were to list the numbers 1 through 18 on a sheet of paper, and then for each of those years, that is the first 18 years of your life, list one good memory for each. After which, you were to take 3 of those memories, perhaps the ones that were easiest to come up with or the ones you remember the best, and in detail, write out the context, the thoughts, the feelings, the smells, the sounds of those memories. You were to analyze every aspect of that memory to find what triggers the joy in it for you. They aren't always what we think of first when we have that memory. So dig in, dig deeply. These little triggers are quite likely replicable for you in your life as it is today. Now, as long as you aren't expecting the moon, but if you remain lucid about your current circumstances, your current responsibilities, your current context, some of them might just be small enough for you to invest your time, your talent, and your treasure into it again now. And let me tell you, I am so here for that. Our homework from last week was to look at a list of more than 60 virtues and values to see what spoke to us. I call those virtues the edge pieces to the puzzle of our life. They are the container for all the other details of our life. They are the words we want to be remembered by, the things we want people to say about us when we're gone. Remember a minute ago when I told you about the woman who had 20 of her "in my ideal life, I'm a person who" statements, which included the words simple or simplicity or simplify? Simplicity is, in and of itself, a virtue. But it became evident that exploring and pursuing the other values and virtues that were important to her was a way for her to actively experience simplicity in her life. For example, honesty and loyalty. These are virtues, and they are virtues that she saw as a way to cultivate simplicity in her relationships. 2 of her edge pieces were courage and integrity. These were 2 virtues that she saw as a way to help cultivate simplicity in her work situation, which is admittedly rather complicated. It was courage to do the right thing and integrity to do it in spite of the headwinds. Frugality and joy. Frugality and joy were virtues that she wanted to define in her meals. She actually has a proverb over the entrance of her kitchen that reads, "Better is a meal of vegetables where there is love than a fattened calf with hatred." Do you see how all those work together? Those big words in our ideal life exercise, they often are magnified or better understood in the light of the virtues that we want to possess and be remembered for. So there is going to be some overlap in your answers to these questions, and that makes total sense. Each exercise is intended to help you, unique, individual you, to determine what it is that you want for your life. And normally, once you get started on these exercises, you will find that what you want for your life is remarkably consistent. Who you were, who you are in your ideal life, and how you want to be remembered. These are not going to be at polar ends of the spectrum. And what's neat about that is that if each of these 3 exercises were a circle of a Venn diagram, oh yes, because you knew I'd have to come back to a Venn diagram, didn't you? There would be some very interesting crossover points. What you used to enjoy, for example, in your ages 1 to 18 exercise will probably overlap somewhere, at least once, with one of your in my ideal life statements. At the same time, what you want to be remembered for by the people who love you, those edge pieces will likely overlap somewhere, either with your ideal life statements or with your ages 1 to 18 exercise. Those places of overlap are places where sparkle is not far from the surface. We need to pay close attention to where we find those consistencies in what we used to love, what we want in our ideal life, and how we want to be remembered. And you might just find that there will be places where all 3 will overlap. And those places are the areas that are most likely to procure immeasurable joy when you start pursuing them in a methodical, coordinated, intentional way. I suspect that for some of you, even as I say those words, you know exactly what I'm talking about. The problem is that you just don't know where to start. And that, my country bumpkin, is why you need a fairy godmother. And I got some good news for you. You've got one. And you also have a fabulous wicked stepsister. Now let me catch you up, in case you're arriving late to the party. You see, on this podcast, we're learning how to dig up our treasures, the ones that we buried or that got buried for us, and we're learning how to become who we imagine ourselves being in the deepest depths of our hearts. It's one thing to think about this in terms of living now, living presently and fully because it simply feels better than living any other way does. Let's call this our first order of business. It's another thing to consider what we're going to call our second order of business, which is that when people arrive towards the end of their lives, which happens to everyone, that they inevitably regret not having lived according to their virtues and their dreams. They regret not having spent more time with their loved ones. They regret not having loved better. While I am a fairy godmother of the first order, you have a wicked stepsister who is an expert in the second. She is a death doula. She works with people who are dying to help them and their families as this inevitable date on their calendar approaches. She has quite a few thought-provoking things to say on what we are trying to do here. So I'm passing the reins of the podcast over to Layla Kelly of Leaving Well End of Life Planning, death doula, and your wicked stepsister. Layla, the floor is yours.
Once upon a time, there was a wicked stepsister, and she loved to talk about death. This made people uncomfortable, but all the same, she knew that talking about death is healthy, and so she listened when others talked, and every now and then, she even told some of her own stories. This is one of those stories, one of my stories. The story of my grandpa's funeral. First off, let me tell you a little bit about him. My grandfather was awesome. He wore Ben Davis striped work shirts, the ones with the zipper and the gorilla on the pocket, and he smelled of Brute cologne. He was a very smart man, an electrician. I honestly believe that he could fix anything. He was practical, and he didn't complicate things. He carried that practicality to his last day. He fell asleep in his recliner while watching TV. My grandma was out running errands. Practical, no drama. He just fell asleep. Many people would choose that death if they could control their own timeline with such precision. His funeral, and I'm putting air quotes around the word funeral, was perfect. But we'll get back to that in a bit. Have you ever eaten at a supper club? The kind of place where they serve shrimp cocktail before the entree and a little bowl of ice cream to top it all off? A place where a child can order a Shirley Temple or a Roy Rogers to enjoy with the grown-ups? When I was little, my grandparents would make the trip from the Bay Area to the little town in Idaho where my family lived. They would take us to the 28 Club, which was a supper club out on Highway 28. I would order a Shirley Temple. I loved those dinners. They were a little celebration of my grandparents' visit. Fast forward to October 25th, 2004. I got a phone call. The following afternoon, I found myself 1,000 miles from home, standing in a small room in a funeral home, saying goodbye to my grandpa. He was gone. We had made the arrangements. There would be no funeral. In recent years, my grandfather had been to too many funerals, and he wasn't going to another, not even his own. And that was fine, because Grandpa had a better idea, an elegant, simple, perfect, practical idea. In lieu of a eulogy, in lieu of perfumed flowers and black limousines, my grandpa had made a simple request. He wanted to take his family to one last dinner. So, a few evenings later, a small group gathered at PJ's Restaurant and Cocktail, a neighborhood gathering spot that opened before I was even born. We remembered Grandpa. His siblings told stories and raised their glasses in honor of their brother. Grandma sat at the head of the table, my mom on her left, my uncle on her right. She didn't say much, she just listened. I don't remember what the others said or did. I don't remember what I did. But I do hope that I ordered a Shirley Temple. After all, it really was a celebration. Looking back, those few days have stuck with me. I've often thought about that dinner and how it made me feel. Yes, I was sad, but I also started to learn what a gift it can be to celebrate life and death in a way that reflects our values and our ideals. Grandpa's dinner started me thinking about good death, living in such a way that one day you will have the freedom to die peacefully. I hope that you listen to this podcast and you consider your ideal life. And every once in a while, just here or there, I hope you can also make room for this. In my ideal death, I am a person who what?
Alors on chante, on danse, on fait la fête.
Thank you so much, Layla. Your perspective is always fascinating. I will link to Layla's work in the show notes. As Layla always says, thinking about death won't kill you, so checking out her resources will not kill you either. I promise. If you need to find a reason to celebrate something, I'm your gal. I can always find a silver lining, which can make me downright unbearable at times. I am a person who, after my husband finishes grading papers that he had hanging over his head, I say, ooh, how are we going to celebrate? I am a person who does not differentiate between big reasons to celebrate and little reasons to celebrate. I also do not generally differentiate between big celebrations and little celebrations. I am just as likely to enjoy inhaling the smell of my own hands after I peel a clementine as I am to plan a series of concerts as a reward for an accomplishment. I've heard it said that our life is like a necklace. As we learn to savor life, as we learn to celebrate in ways small and big, It's like we're stringing more and more beads of joy onto the necklace of our lives. As we string together more moments of joy, our necklace starts to look a lot like a life of joy. Let me give you some examples. When my littlest scallywag was a baby, he up and decided one day that he was done nursing and he never cared to see my boobies again. My boobies, however, did not get the message right away. As a matter of fact, they didn't get the message for a really, really long time, which led to some rather painful moments. I could have taken stock in a cabbage farm, if you know what I mean. I was sad that he was done nursing because our nursing relationship had been so easy, whereas with the first baby, nursing had been a trial from the beginning to the end. I needed to make peace with the end of our nursing relationship. Now, while in the thick of nursing, I had tried all ways to increase milk production, herbal teas, keeping hydrated, pumping. I also avoided anything that might possibly impede production. Whether or not it's true, I had read that mint was not good for milk supply, so I avoided it like the plague, to the point of even foregoing mint chocolate chip ice cream, which, let's all agree, is an incredible sacrifice. I have also always loved to drink mint tea, and please don't judge me on this, but I like it with maple syrup. Our favorite Chinese restaurant always gives sprigs of mint with their egg rolls, and I always save them up. I freeze them, and then I make myself a minty maple syrupy special treat, which I call my mint julep. And as the Southern belle that you are, I think you can imagine the joy that I was sacrificing during the time that I nursed my baby. In order to make peace with the end of the season of nursing, I felt like I needed to do some kind of performative, joy-filled act. I decided to celebrate the end of nursing. I decided to celebrate my buoys. I went to the tea shop, leaving my boys with their indulgent father one day, and I ordered a mint tea. Before I took my first sip, I thanked my boobies for having been such amazing machines and nourishing two fantastic scalawags. And then I told them, in hushed whispers when no one else was around, "You're done now. You can retire." I don't know how much the mint tea really made a difference, but my heart was able to let go of the nursing season. My boobies got the message. Shortly thereafter, I had no more need for cabbage leaves. The act itself, drinking a cup of mint tea, is not a big celebration, but the intention of it, the act of loving myself for myself and what my body can do, loving my own body, well, that was one big bead of joy to string onto the necklace of my life. At the risk of putting her on blast for something that she may or may not want widely known, I'm just going to say that I have a friend who finally arrived at the end of this, is it pregnancy or is it menopause game show that is the 365-day no period prior to officially be considered a woman in menopause. As she arrived towards that date that would mark the end of her 1 year and the official start of menopause, I said, let's have a menopause happy hour to celebrate. And so we did. We did it virtually because it was during the pandemic lockdown, but nonetheless, we have a really funny picture of the two of us giggling, a little bit tipsy, about our first periods and our really embarrassing, cringeworthy hormonal moments over the years. Again, it was not a big celebration. It was a cocktail over FaceTime, but it meant something. It was bringing another bead of joy to the necklace of both of our lives. Many moons ago, I read a book called The Red Tent. It's a fiction around the biblical story of Dinah, one of the daughters of Jacob. In it, when she gets her first period, she goes through a really strange ritual, which read like a kind of a dreamy party. I don't know if there really are cultures in the world that celebrate women's milestones like that, or if it was entirely fictional. But I found this to be so empowering. Why don't we celebrate our first periods, or the end of nursing, or our arrival into menopause? I so desperately want to live in a world where girls are not shamed for our bodies and our hormonal cycles and our aging process. And we can start by celebrating our own milestones. You remember me talking about Gigi, right? My smoking hot grandma? For all that she was not always very discreet in her turquoise mini dresses with red pom-poms, and for her flaming red hair and her various attempts, both natural and crazy unnatural, to get rid of her universes and constellations of freckles, for all her little white sports cars with white leather interior, for all that she could be embarrassing to all of us. Gigi knew how to celebrate. Gigi always carried these tangy little lemon drops in a Ziploc bag in her white purse. I remember her calling them her happy pills. Her face, when she would put one of those in her mouth, it was pure bliss. When my sister and I were little, very, very little, Gigi was babysitting us. Oh, we must have been, 7 and 3 years old? I do believe that I probably asked if we could have a tea party, because that's always been something I love to do. It's always been my go-to celebration, if you will. For whatever reason, Gigi was not interested in having a tea party. No. What Gigi was more interested in doing was having a cocktail party and teaching her granddaughters, ages 3 and 7 years, how to give a toast. Yep, so she poured us 7-Up in real glasses, which I knew for a fact I was not allowed to be using at that age. Oh, it felt so special. She taught us to raise our glass, to clink them, and yet again, for whatever reason, she taught us to say, "Nuts to ya." Your celebration can be as bawdy or as innocent as you want it to be. But let me tell you, the innocent ones leave no flavor of bitterness as time passes. The memory of them only gets sweeter. This year, around Valentine's Day, I did a lot of that kind of celebrating. I love my husband. I love Valentine's Day. And this year, Valentine's Day fell in the middle of the winter break. Let's be honest. Could there be a more thoughtful gift than for the man you love to say, "Ma chérie, why don't you stay home alone for a few days while I take the children to see their grandparents?" What did you say, Lily? What do you think I said, silly? I got them packed as quickly as I could get them out the door. I celebrated Valentine's Day by getting dressed up in one of my cutest outfits and having a tea party. I celebrated by working all day in fabulous clothes just because I wanted to, and making myself vats and vats and vats of coffee and savoring every first sip. This cost me nothing. No money. Just a little time. And for the rest of my life, when I think of Valentine's Day, I will remember Valentine's Day 2022 as that colorful, sun-drenched year in which I celebrated me and all the ways that I have rediscovered joy. Don't wait. Please do not put off celebrating your milestones and your successes. You deserve a tea party or a menopause happy hour, or just an evening spent on the couch in your favorite sweater under a cozy blanket with a cat at your feet reading about the Salem witch trials because for some reason this is fascinating to you right now. The only caveat is that you must take a moment to savor the experience, to imagine that this moment is a beat of joy and that you're stringing it onto the necklace of your life. Speaking of good moments that I want to string onto the necklace of my life, I want to thank those of you who have rated and reviewed the podcast on various platforms. I am always tickled when I discover, usually by accident, that there is a new one out there. I'd like to take a second to read a few of those because I do love to celebrate things. This first one from a user named Missy Agogo. The review title is just one word, but it gave me so much joy. Inspiring! Exclamation point. May I digress for just a second? This is Lily again. I'm a sucker for enthusiastic punctuation. All right, closing the parenthesis. Whether you find yourself searching for lost sparkle or not, there is something for everyone in this podcast. Yep, that was her review. Thank you so much, Missy Agogo. I really, really, really appreciate that. There is something for everyone. I certainly hope there is. And then here's this next review. It's from a user named Tiffer the Biffer. The title of the review is A Blessing with a Beautiful Message. The review reads, Lily does an amazing job with her witty and thought-provoking stories. A lovely voice with something important to say. She's like a personal coach with fairy wings! Exclamation points. Thank you, thank you, thank you. When you rate and review the podcast, it helps the podcast platforms know that we have something going on over here that's worth listening to. I am so honored and so pleased to have your ear for this little 30 minutes each week. Thank you for listening. Thank you for sharing. Thank you for subscribing. I think I'm going to go have a tea party in your honor. If you need some help celebrating the little things, you really should join us in our private Facebook group called You Are Not Done Sparkling Yet. I'll link to it in the show notes. For the first few weeks of March in our group, we are going to be looking at the ideal life themes, the overarching categories that I personally take a few minutes each day to consider, according to 4 little easy-to-remember bullet-pointed questions. You should join us. We're going to get down to the nuts and bolts of sparkling again, so let me raise my glass and propose a toast. Nuts to ya. In the show notes, you'll also find a link to Laela's website and some of her resources about planning for our own death. This is truly a life-giving thing. You can follow the show on Facebook or Instagram at Sing With Your Feet, or you can reach out to me personally on social media at Lilyfields Challenge, Lily Fields Challenge. Thank you so much for sharing the podcast with people that you think could use a fairy godmother. A great big merci to 7 Production here in Mulhouse, France for the use of the song La Joie as the intro and outro of the show, to Matt Kugler who sang it and Claude Equate who wrote it. I owe you all a tea party. This is your fairy godmother signing off. Just remember, it is never too late to start singing with your feet.